phone her.
Oh, okay. Well,
Anyway,
interesting to see. I'm not the only one that has that trouble from time to time. Yeah, you've been
yeah, it's
having it.
been going on
You've
for a
been
couple
having
of
it
days
much
now.
of the last two or 3 days, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna have to phone them and say what the hell. I got a subscription and I
Yeah,
can't open the articles. What's that
yeah.
about? You know.
I know. I was like, so I opened the article on the standard one time, and it didn't give it to me. But if I opened the same article on the review, it gave it to me.
Well, yeah,
And then
that's true.
another
That's true.
time,
That'll happen. That'll
yeah,
happen. Uh, but uh, but I'm trying to open one on the review,
yeah. Well,
and it
no,
won't open.
and the other time is what the I was trying to open one on the review, and it just kept giving me the subscribe.
Yeah,
Was my
yeah, same
subscription
thing.
running out?
Yeah, so I'm
Anyway,
gonna have to.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I find things like the National Post even odder, by the way, but still, Okay, so 8,000 union members in the LCBO voted in favour of strike action, and by 97% of ballots, and this was on an 86% turnout. Hey, Mike, 86% turnout. So how come union and actually union strike votes and boardroom votes? They've got large turnouts, so why can't we get them in politics? Yeah, there's my opening shot for the day. So I'll congratulate the LCBO on the turnout, right?
Yes. Well, I would say that that one of the things obviously is people don't show up for elections is because they don't think anything's going to change.
Yeah.
The leaders don't excite them,
Become
or
cynical about it.
Yeah, we had a dismal turnout for the last provincial election, so much so that Metaphysical Mike actually said, "Is it really an election if less than half of the people show up to vote?" Unfortunately, is because
even if one person shows up to vote, and Doug Ford comes out and votes for himself, and he's the only person in the province to vote, well, it's still election. It's still, a valid election, isn't it? Even though the irony here is that there are some nations that have 110% turnout on their polls, and everybody's banned from leaving home that day, and other nations where they only get one vote, the president voting for himself.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, those places are not well. Those places are fixed elections, et cetera, et cetera. The observers and things like that we need that tells us that we have positive elections and all that. But here, that's never usually a question here.
Yeah,
it's
amount. And you see 8,060 LCBO members. That's not a large population anyway, but LCBO members of the Ontario Public Services Employee Union. So that's only 8,060 people, who are members that work for LCBO. I suppose that's easily organized, right? And besides, people are voting. Irrespective of what the turnout, what the result of the vote is, people are voting for something that matters to them. In fact, actually directly impacts them.
Australia had a turnout of over 90% in their last election.
Yeah, but it's forced turnout, and you see what isn't told about that.
Is it forced? How would you term it? Forced? It says it's mandatory.
It's mandatory.
It's mandatory,
right? Yeah. But what you don't hear about that, and this is where I dug deeper, there are 15%. The actual votes were 72%, right? Actual marks on pieces of paper was only 72%. So many people, there's nearly 20% of people who showed up didn't, just basically turned up, signed in and left.
So they had a protest vote. That's their way of doing a protest vote.
Well,
No, 72%. So yeah, that's the way of doing this protest vote, is not making anything on just putting in a marred voting ballot.
No. What I'm saying, 72, only 70. The actual vote was 72%. The turnout might have been 90%, but the point being is that 20% of the people who showed up basically showed up, signed in, and walked away, because if they didn't show up, sign in, they would get $100 fine.
Okay, so they showed up, they registered, they didn't take a ballot, so it's not mandatory to vote, it's just mandatory to show up at the voting booth.
Yes.
So, but 18% of them just turned around and walked out. I would imagine a certain amount of them were just going to get it done quick to get out of there, because they wanted a beer instead. Other ones, this may have been a sort of demonstration vote, that kind of thing,
Yeah. Well, anyway, whichever. But you see, the thing is, direct, like a union vote, is directly about, you're taking strike action. You're taking action which affects your job, basically. So there's, I think Colleen McLeod is saying this record turnout will send a strong message to Doug Ford and LCBO that aren't backing down in this fight, that we aren't backing down in this fight. We're fighting for a strong future for LCBO. Yeah,
this is well, of course, right now their whole go ahead.
That's what you expect a union leader to say, right?
Yes. Now, right now, they see their future as somewhat of a in jeopardy, because the beer store is going to be sold off, or at least aspects of beer. The controlling the LCBO is a nice job for those people who have it. They're going to be paid more than a grocery store clerk who puts liquor or beer or wine on a grocery shelf. There are good jobs with good paying benefits and things like that. So you can see that the liquor store might feel a little bit vulnerable. Although it is said that when the beer stores meet now, beers can be sold in grocery stores and corner stores now. They claim that the brewers retailer will not lose any employees. That is yet to be seen. It's kind of like those self-checkout things in the grocery stores, like, oh, we're not going to lose any staff. And then more and more of the self-checkout things come. I don't like them, but
well, sometimes you're
forced to use them.
The interesting thing is there's these new checkout stuff. So they took away that they've got two of these super massive checkouts at Walmart, but they take about 5 workers to control the flow through in those checkouts when they're at maximum, so they took away several checkouts, and probably 5 workers off those checkouts are now turned into checkout staff for the self-check.
I absolutely hate those things. Yeah, they're easy to operate and stuff like that. I go to Shoppers Drug Mart once in a while, and I absolutely there is one counter person, but that's it. If you want to get in and out, you've got to use the self-checkout. You have to.
Because the line, because there's 15 people in the queue otherwise, right?
Yeah, or they're there for information or whatever else. And I absolutely dislike it completely. And if I'm in any kind of grocery store, I try to make sure that I get in a line where there's an actual checkout person, because I see a job going down the line. There is a job there. And if you want to complain, we had an article about Loblaws being boycotted. To me, the big problem here is those self-checkout things should be completely illegal. That's what they should be going after.
I've been using
those people at the top were making more enormous amounts of money at the top, and then they're canceling jobs on the floor. I mean, jobs that people could use. These are usually a checkout cashier or something as a supplement income to the main income of the house, but still, sometimes it's a very important job. Sometimes it's a job for a student, anything like that, and you got some goddamn machine doing it for you. I can't really see that machine really saving them a whole lot of money. All they're doing is, they're saving it. What they're saying is this machine here is better than a person. I don't want no persons anymore because persons need money to live, and we have to share with those persons. We have to share money with them, and we have to give them wages. I'm not so sure. I don't want to be a Luddite here, but I mean, in a situation like that, when we are already in a very depersonalized society as it is, hello, Karen. So we're in a depersonalized. Oh, there's Gary. Hi, Gary. Green bastard from parts unknown, aka. So this business. So I think that the LCBO should actually make sure that their tellers and everybody else is well protected through time. I think that's part of what should happen in this job action that they're about to do. They're and of course this is just like the other strikes we've been covering lately. Government, whoever is negotiating with them, leaves it to the last minute, and then they go over, and the union keeps saying, "Hey, we gotta need a contract here. We need a contract here. We've been working without a contract." Then suddenly they say, "Okay, that's it. Let's go on strike." Then all of a sudden something gets done. Good show yesterday. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Gary.
Well, the other thing about it is that we've just gone through a period, of course, of of high inflation, and in fact, the typical response, and I'm not making any value judgment in this statement. I'm saying the typical response, of course, to that by working people is that, hey, we need our contract renegotiated. We need to take into consideration the fact that we've just gone through a period of heavy inflation. And we're still facing, for example, next year, if you're getting your, mortgage renewed next year, you can be guaranteed it isn't a 2.9%.
Yeah, well, the thing here is the fact that they're left without a contract, without negotiations. And
I know, but it's just saying
this is the most irritating part of the whole thing. The employer, no matter what it is, whether it's the government or some other employer, always wins the longer they wait to sign a new contract. Because unless the contract is retroactive, sometimes they are. So it's always to their best interest to plod along and irritate the union members. And quite often, the union members then begin to get scared. Are they going to lose their jobs or whatever else? What's management doing?
Well, that actually has got to be a valid question in this instance, because how safe are LCBO jobs given what Doug Ford is doing with the beer store?
Yeah, although you have one of these political promises that nobody's going to lose their job, and of course, how often do we believe that kind of thing? We're signing a new contract with the union, and nobody's going to lose a job, and then 2 months later, we got to do this massive layoff. I thought you weren't going to lay anyone off. Well, things have changed.
Actually, the neatest trick with that one is government one says nobody's going to lose their job. So like a conservative government says nobody's going to lose their job. Then 6 months later, Liberals are elected, and the first thing they do is cut those jobs.
Yeah, we'll see about that. But of course, the LCBO wants, and like I said before, they're peddling liquor. And if they're peddling liquor in a grocery store, well, the grocery store is making money or the corner store is making money, but the wages of the cashiers are not all that good. If you go into a liquor store, they're going to make a pretty good wage. They're going to get benefits. I mean, it might not be the greatest job in the world, but it's going to be a job that pays the bills a lot more than a cashier at a corner store. So a cashier at a corner store is checking in your bought cans of beer, and what's the difference between them and a cashier at a liquor store? Well, the one in the liquor store is making a fair buck for doing what they're doing. And that's my biggest problem with this whole thing, shifting it to grocery stores. And
interesting.
If it does challenge or it reduces the amount of the workforce. Eventually, it will. Obviously, they say in the beer store they're not going to lose anybody, but what that also means is they're not going to gain anybody. The beer store should be growing at a certain rate and hiring a certain amount of people. To say that you're not going to lose any employees by putting the beer in the corner stores and grocery stores, what it means is it still means a loss of jobs, because it means you're not going to be growing. And those people who are selling it in the corner stores or grocery stores are making a lot less. And I think that's the real tragedy here, is the
but again,
the prospect of losing jobs, good paying jobs.
But again, that's one of the reasons why probably LCBO, management, and of course the government is looking at not paying extras, because they're looking at why shouldn't we be employing minimum wage people?
I don't know about that. Seriously, you have a situation where, I mean, the world is such a place. Is like if your car company costs too much money and can't compete with cars coming from somewhere else, you lose auto workers. That's basic capitalism.
Yeah.
And we've got tariffs up, and we've got all other kinds of things to protect our cars, and so do the United States or whatever. Those are the tariffs and things that will maintain jobs. But stuff like this, where you do have a store, it's called a liquor store and it's called a beer store, and their employees are decently paid, much better than a cashier in a grocery store. What you're doing by taking the beer and the liquor and selling it in other places is reducing the ability of that union to grow, and reducing the ability of that mercantile or that store to grow. And that tells me that they're going, although they may not lose any jobs in places like the LCBO or the liquor store, is you're going to lose union members in the long run, because less will be created, because the marketing is going somewhere else. And Mike Christmas says this is union busting at its best. Yeah, I think this time the unions got it over the government, though. Just like the border service people, they have it like they've waited too long, and the sympathy for the LCBO workers is greater than that for the government.
Well, and that actually is always the questionable one, because whenever you look in our society, there's you get that divided between those that say, hey, they're right, they should have a contract, they need to get this negotiated, and those that say, yeah, those workers are bloody lazy, get back to work.
Get out the bullwhip.
And I'm not saying I agree.
You're lucky to have a bag of oats. Here, get back to work.
I'm not saying I agree with either position, but we've heard we've heard both those positions, time and time again when it comes to strike, right?
Yeah. You got a pair of new clothes 2 years ago. What are you complaining about? Get back to work.
And we give you a hard hat when you need it.
It's summertime. I'm generous with this water because I want you to sweat.
Okay, we're coming up on this anniversary fairly well. It's a while away, but hey, we're coming up on this anniversary in not too long. But 3 weeks before October 7th invasion by Hamas, the IDF Gaza Division warned of the Hamas planned attack. This was in a detailed document called Detailed Raid Training from End to End. It was circulated on September 19th last year and reportedly brought to the attention of at least some senior intelligence officers who apparently ignored the report. Well, hey, Detailed Raid Training from End to End is a boring title on the planet, isn't it? It lacks every bit of marketing, every bit of marketing nous in there. There's no sex, there's no drugs, there's no rock and roll. Hey, that's the most boring title. No wonder. Hey. Even if you were the Minister of Internal War, you'd be throwing this one in the bin.
Yes. Well, but the takeaway here is that the IDF knew about this 3 weeks before it happened and ignored it. There is an intelligence, and part of the reason I've been looking into this other places or just happenstance hearing stuff about this. This was an intelligent report, and most of the people that derived the intelligence, evidently, I'm not so sure about, but this is the claim, that they were younger and they were women. Younger, most of them were women, and most of them were younger soldiers or intelligence people who discovered that the Hamas was planning this big attack, and they had it all documented. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had Hamas documents. They had observations on the ground with them practicing the raid. And this was completely revealed to the IDF 3 weeks before the attack. We've also heard that the Egyptians tipped them off, and other people have tipped the IDF off that this was going to happen. There is also people within the IDF who rang the alarm bell, but were completely ignored. Now, of course, this is great conspiracy theory stuff. Did Netanyahu want this to happen? Because he wants to ruin Gaza, right? He wants people out of there. Did he let it happen? Did the security forces turn the other way because they wanted this outrage to happen so that they could kill 100,000 Palestinians? Right now, they're at about 40,000.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair comment as well, because the only way to spark a war in this situation is have Hamas invade.
Yes. Hamas would definitely...
They can't be the aggressor, because being the aggressor, of course, the whole world will basically say, a nation stamps down on its minorities.
Well, it does that all the time with impunity anyway. It does what they call mowing the lawn in Gaza. Every so many years, they take their jets and kill about 5,000 people and come back. That's what they call mowing the lawn. When the Palestinian protesters came up to the fence as a protest, unarmed protest, Israeli snipers killed a bunch of them, including, I remember a young woman, like, I don't know, she's in her 20s, she's waving, she's standing there protesting, and she took a bullet. I think, and of course, it was with impunity. The Israeli soldiers were picking them off whenever they wanted to, and nobody could care less. There were unarmed people on the other side of the fence protesting. And so there's one outrage after another. And of course, we focus in on October 7th, but I will agree with the UN chief. This did not happen in a vacuum. Oppression leads to reaction. Reaction leads to more oppression. and if you murder somebody, they're going to murder you back, and it's just a long line of you murder us, we murder you, kind of thing as we steal your land.
Yeah.
But whether or not the IDF ignored it on purpose, that's kind of a reach. I think it was just pure incompetence. The IDF believed that it had the best army and military forces to keep everybody contained in the Gaza, and they didn't have to worry about it, despite the fact that they're constantly training for a raid. And this raid was documented, and more than one person knows about it, and the IDF ignored it. This is another problem with Israel. It's supposed to have the best and sharpest army, and yet something as simple as this they got away with. They practiced out in the open. Their plans were captured. Everybody ignored it. Well, the people who counted ignored it. And then the reaction to the invasion was very bad too. I tried to find out how many Hamas fighters were killed. At one time, in the initial raid, at one time it was 1,500. They do have 1,000 bodies they're willing to trade with Hamas or with the Palestinians once this is all over with, for bodies that the Hamas has, but they have about 1,000 bodies, but they claim they killed 1,500. And of course, the ever-present and irritating factor that's going to be pretty bad for the IDF going forward is the poor response they had for the invasion. Not only did the Hamas just stroll in and then cause mayhem, but when the IDF responded to them, they responded poorly. And we don't know how many civilians. There's about 800 civilians killed in the October 7th attack. Yeah. The rest of them were police or security forces or IDF. So we don't know how many of the 800 civilians were killed, how many of them were actually killed by friendly fire, because the IDF had a really confused reaction to all this. And of course, it is again put out there that the Hannibal Directive was in operation. It was permitted during this. They were told to enact the Hannibal Directive, and the Hannibal Directive is to kill any potential Israeli hostage because they cost the Israeli government too much. So you have IDF forces killing Israelis to make sure they're not going to be used as hostages.
Well, the other thing about this is that when they were training, the Hamas fighters were instructed not to leave documents behind after they raided bases, right? Terrorists were also trained to ensure that hostages did not have mobile phones on them. They were forbidden from informing families, informing their families on the condition they were ordered to move them if it became apparent that Israel determined their location, the document. And this is from the Hamas documentation. So mobile phones were barred. And that's sensible if you think about it, because you can trace a person from a mobile phone.
Yes, you can. And it was a very good operation. The problem is, and what another thing that's often not talked about here, they had a lot of hangers on. When Hamas and the other Islamic groups ran in, the ones that were well trained, piles and piles of Palestinians followed them in.
Yeah.
And some of those people that were grabbed as hostages were not grabbed by Hamas. Evidently, they were just grabbed by people that ran in there to follow Hamas, because there are opportunists looking for money. And Israelis pay big for their hostages, evidently, or you can get something for them big. That's the whole reason why they went for hostages, because they were able to hold one for 5 years and get a lot out of it. And that's why the Hannibal Directive came in. If they have a hostage, we don't want them to have that hostage. Let's kill them and the hostage. Then that will solve our problem. Kind of like the Algerians do when they surround terrorists that are keeping hostages they tell them right off the bat, everybody's going to die in there. We don't play this game. If you want to keep hostages, well, we have to kill the hostages to get you. We're going to, and that's kind of like what the Israelis do, or do on the QT, right? That's called the Hannibal Directive. That because they had one soldier for 5 years, and it cost the Israelis a lot of money. And when they did get that one soldier back after 5 years, I think they had to release something like 1,000 prisoners out of prison. One of them may have been Yo-Yo Sinkar, who is the leader of Hamas. He may have been the mastermind behind this raid. So the circle just keeps going round and round and round. Yeah. What we found out is there was no beheaded babies. 38 children got killed. Some of them may have been killed by the IDF. We found that about 800 civilians get killed, and so the story keeps going. There was no systematic rape. That's been worked out by the. Go ahead.
Yeah, and rape almost happens in every military circumstance, although it shouldn't happen in the modern day, but it still does a lot. And but in fact, yes, you're right. There was no systematic raping of Palestinian women in Gaza. It may have happened ones and twos, unorganized, but that's typical for any military raid.
Well, that would be the British Army, Canadian Army, and American Army. There one or two of them will go around rape. Why do you think the United States insists on immunity for its soldiers in every country it goes to? And if you can't get immunity for your soldiers, you leave. When they were they leave. In Japan, they have immunity for soldiers, and rape is a big problem there. In places like Okinawa, they've had a lot of problems with soldiers raping local women. Of course, you have thousands of soldiers, and you've got thousands of locals, and you're going to have an incident once in a while because you can't guarantee the character of your soldiers. I'm sure that's pretty much the same with Hamas too. I'm pretty sure they were instructed, do not rape. We're not supposed to look that bad. But and who was doing the raping anyway? Like I said before, there was a whole lot of hangers-on come in with Hamas that day. People who weren't involved with Hamas just came in to see what kind of things they could scavenge that day.
Scavenging and raping is raping and pillage is part of scavenging anyway, right?
Yeah. So basically, we have an irresponsible government. That is the Israelis. They have not allowed international journalism to go inside Gaza. They have not allowed international journalism to break down the information they have on October 7th. And this business here, this was leaked. The IDF knew about the attack 3 weeks before it happened, and after it did happen, they did not respond very well at all. All that stuff, there was a lid put on it, and now it's all coming out. But what they do is they just slow everything right down to molasses until everybody sort of forgets about it. And I think that's pretty much what they're trying to do here in Gaza. They're going to do one outrage after another and hope that time will keep people thinking in a different way. As you may have noticed on the news, there's a lot less Gaza coverage these days. All of a sudden, it kind of dropped off in my mind. I mean, every day there was stuff on Gaza, but the same outrages are happening. The big news out of Gaza was the 8 Israeli soldiers killed by counterattack in Hamas, close to, I think it was somewhere in the middle of the Gaza Strip. But anyway, the whole thing's got to stop. It's completely stupid. It's outrageous. One group after another, over and over and over, doctor after doctor after doctor who are used to war zones that go in there for a couple of months and then come back out, says it's the worst they've ever seen.
Yeah,
seriously, people who've been to Sudan, who've been to Iraq and Afghanistan and all the other places where there's been mass mass killing because of war. They say this is the worst they've ever seen. And yet you cannot get the United States or the West to actually do anything. I would just like to see the UN Army walk in there and stop it all and say, you stay on this side, you stay on this side. Let's sort it out. First of all, let's start feeding these children. Let's
be honest about it, though. The UN forces are rarely that effective, are they?
No, as a matter of fact, they used to be in Palestine and the West Bank and stuff, and they throw them out. But that was because Israel wanted them out. The biggest problem in this whole thing is that Israel gets to do anything it wants with impunity because it has a massively powerful lobby group, of which AIPAC is part of. And we found out from Thomas, the representative, the Republican Congressman Thomas Massey, how that works. They have an AIPAC guy follow you around and tell you what to do. And he says that everyone in the Republican Party has an AIPAC guy except him. And I imagine everyone in the Democrat Party has an AIPAC guy. Maybe not Bernie Sanders. He doesn't like AIPAC too well. But, Yarny there. Here it is again. Is he anti-Semitic? Is he a self-hating Jew? There was another thing I heard of too, like here in Canada and places in the United States, Jews who have who are up for appointments one way or another in a university or something and have expressed their disapproval of the war will be called anti-Semitic. I'm serious. I heard this yesterday from a guy. I think he was going to be the guy appointed to the Holocaust Memorial or something like that. He's a professor of history, but he's expressed strong views against the war. So he was called an anti-Semite, and he's Jewish.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. So funding stagnates for disability support services right now, and Niagara Development Services agencies are hoping to draw attention to the lack of provincial funding for their programs as they try to keep up with community needs. And in fact, Community Living Ontario initiated a campaign which is #5 to survive. And their aim is to draw attention to how funding given to agencies at community and provincial levels to help people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities has stagnated in recent times. They're saying recent decades, right? Which means that this isn't a yesterday problem. It's not a last week problem. It's been going on for a long time.
Yes. Seriously, like, finally the article opened for me. Oh my gosh. Anyway, yeah. So here we go again. The people at the lower end of society, the ones that have the softest voices, are not getting what they deserve. This is what we should be doing as a government. We have to listen equally to our people in society. Disabled people in society need more than the rest of us. Big, smelly deal. So let's give it to them. But this kind of thing, when the funding is stagnated and is put on the back burner, you can always say, well, we haven't got too much money and everybody's got to hold back and all that, but not disabled people. No. Disabled people need more resources and we have to give it to them. That's only fair. And if you cannot tell a disabled person, well, tomorrow or the next day we'll get around to it, you're going to have to make do with what you have. I just went through this. A friend of mine, a Kiwanian, has an electric wheelchair, and he had to get a new one, and all the baloney he had to go through to get it, and all that other stuff.
Yep.
I mean, seriously. Anyway, so that's my rage right now. But let's get into it.
Okay. So they're calling on the Community Living Ontario is calling on the provincial government to include stabilization investments with an immediate base increase of 5%. This is on the payouts to Ontario Works on ODSP, etc., and a commitment to sustainable and ongoing annualized funding increases. So
funding and research too. Like, where's the research money? Like, I mean, I know a person who ever since was a little kid was used as an experiment, as a kind of a guinea pig for prosthesis, particularly arm prosthesis and stuff like that. So she was, they experimented on her, what is a better prosthesis and all this other stuff. And okay, that's good money spent, right? Definitely. That's good research and all that, right? But I'd like to see more of it. Like, there is no way that you can cut back. The rest of us can cut back a little bit here and there, but not people who are disabled. They can't come back. What are you going to do? You got a flat tire on your wheelchair. You're going to have to wait till next month to get it fixed.
Well, the worst of this is that the things like the Ontario Disability Living Allowance that is paid for Ontario people receiving ODSP is actually, it could be raised by 3 or 4 times, and you still wouldn't get enough to pay for an average Ontario rent these days.
All right, so I was immediately angry, but let's get to the meat and potatoes. She says, inflation poses a tangible threat to the livelihood of services offered by her organization, which could result in them ending programs helping people with developmental disabilities in communities. And it says here, we've seen minimum base increases and our cost of living has gone up 60%.
Yeah. So
60%.
This is Susan Fielding York, who's Community Living St. Catharines CEO, right? And this is what she was talking about. And Community Living Ontario decided, in conjunction with the rest of us, that we would start a campaign to draw attention to our urgent need for public sector stabilization funding for developmental services.
There's about 5,000 people in Niagara that need that assistance, it says here.
Yeah.
And anyway, Fielding York, that's her hyphenated last name. So we know her husband's York, said that a lack of adequate funding could have devastating consequences, leading to program cuts. People, okay. Why is this now? Like, unfortunately, somebody has to come up with this and make it very clear that it's urgent. And where are the ears to listen to her prior to her having to go to the press?
Yeah.
She's got to go to the press. Why? Because nobody's listening to her.
Well,
I mean? It's not, why are you going to the press? Because you have to.
Well,
why
we talked about
the LCBO workers. Why do they have to go on strike? Because no one's listening to them. This here,
I was going to say, though,
very important.
Yeah, I was going to say, we just talked about LCBO workers and that ability for them to go out on strike. What does a disabled person do? They can't go on strike. They're not working.
Seriously. Yeah. I mean, like I said before, I was just a fellow quantity of mine has an electric wheelchair and that, and he's got limited abilities to go here and there and all that other stuff. So already a disabled person's life is severely limited to the places they can go, things they can do. They make the most out of their life. So when somebody comes along and says, well, you know what, we have to reduce the amount of money you have, Karen Fraser, it took me 2 years to apply and receive my leg brace, and I had to pay $500 out of pocket. Yeah, seriously, there's something that you should not have had to pay for. The $500, not at all. $50 maybe, and that'd be delivery charge. I don't even know that. But
I wouldn't
now,
even agree. I wouldn't even. No disabled person should be forced to pay delivery costs for something, for a leg brace or a wheelchair or something like that. We should be looking at the wheelchairs and basically making sure they've got that support.
well, here's a situation where Karen needed it, and it took her 2 years.
Well, she's had. I know, knowing Karen, I know that she's had leg problems for quite some time. I don't know the details of those, but
Since birth.
But yeah, taking 2 years to apply and get them, yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, in any case, she got to meet the Queen. I think give her flowers or something. I think something like that once upon a time. Anyway, that is the one social part of our society that we should have. Look, we have disabled people. They're going to need extra, right? Big, smelly deal, right? Give them the extra. We're talking about 5,000 people here in the Niagara region that need extra help. So
yeah, but again,
out of 400,000, 450,000 people, big, smelly deal. Give them what they need.
But again, I'm going to have to say one thing about this one, of course, is that exactly what you're saying there. But one of the things that we also need to consider when it comes to programs and funding for disability comes in the form of things like public transit, buses, disabled transit, etc. Are they available to allow people to travel when they need to travel? Because
that is a big deal. That is a big deal. Yes.
Yeah. One of Angela's concerns is that basically, in order for her to come into work every morning, she has to get Uber, and to go home overnight, she has to get Uber. All right. There are no buses. There's once an hour bus out in where she lives. That's insufficient.
Yes, quite definitely inefficient. And what is somebody supposed to do in this town if they are disabled? I mean, you can get the Charavan and stuff like that, but it's hard to get that thing. I was just talking about that friend of mine who used it, and another friend who is now deceased that we had to use it sometimes. And I mean, yeah, it when it works, it works. Even my mother, I had to use it with my mother. In fact, I still do once in a while. It works. It works really well. But now the whole thing switched over to city workers. So now it's part of the regional thing. So I'm not so sure that, and it had a pretty slow start. A lot of the people could not get service when it did switch over. Yeah. The problem is, we don't have enough of those. Who's going to pay for it? You see what I mean? We don't have enough Charavans. Who's going to pay for it?
Well, and part of the budget and part of the budgetary issue is always a constant problem. All right.
Yeah, for sure. And
one of the things to note is that St. Catherine's MPP in Queen's Park, Jenny Stevens, she's been working with the Niagara agencies to draw attention to the funding issue for disability supports throughout the, not just for the region, but overall for looking for governmental change.
Yeah. So the disabled people we have, if we have 5,000, it's like what, 0.1% of our population? Yeah. Like 0.01% of our population, something like that. And we're quibbling about how much money we get. I know that like disabled services and disabled equipment for people can be very costly, and their care could be costly. They need attendance and so on and so forth. But if it's such a small part of our population, you know what? That's one place you don't look for cutbacks, and you don't stall on increases, because there's just no way that you can't go and get a wheelchair that uses less electricity or cost less or anything else.
It was a funny thing. I'm talking about wheelchairs. I remember one time seeing, not so long ago, seeing a wheelchair that was designed to actually walk upstairs.
Yes. As a matter of fact, we were when I was with Paul yesterday at a studio. Tim Shafley came along, and he's got a wheelchair that goes up, that raises up, the seat raises up. And the guy I was talking about, the Kwanian, he's got a brand new one that raises up too. So they can go up to countertops and stuff,
Yeah.
Come back down. So it's pretty good.
Yeah. And why not? Because in fact, actually, that's one of the big problems about countertops. Yeah, that's one of the big problems. Many banks actually have low countertops in certain. They have a low counter available that's often open, often the only one open, in order that they can. Work with disabled clients. But yet I saw a bank recently which had steps up to it to get into the door, even though they had disability support inside.
Yeah, it's really weird. I bet you Karen Fraser could tell us countless things about how the societies are responding to disabilities. I do know with my buddy, I used to take him around to a concert here or there, go here and there with him. And we go into the washrooms, like for instance, in the one in Hamilton Place. Karen says, my only income is old age. I've had my brace all my life due to polio. There you have it.
Yeah.
And so she has polio. She's needed a brace all her life. Why do they quibble about giving her the money needed for a brace? Why do they even quibble? Yeah. It's a lifelong thing. You know what I mean?
And they have to be replaced every few years. That's all there is to it. It's and I'd love to see some of these. Also, the other thing is that I'd love to see, and I don't know the brace that Karen is using, but I know there are intelligent braces out there that actually enable their users to actually do more, walk better.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I want a brace that was smarter than me.
Well, that's not difficult, Dave. Come on.
Where are you going, brace? I want to watch this show. But basically, my point here is, I suppose maybe there's a lot of abuse in the system. That's something I didn't think of until right now. And maybe one of the reasons why somebody like Karen has got to wait like 2 years for a new brace and have to pay a big hunk of it for herself is because of other people, doing something to the system, getting more than they should. But somebody like Karen, who's been in the system for like forever, like, why do they quibble with that? I think it's just bad organization. And really, and I keep coming back to this, like, that's one place you do not want to do cutbacks. You can cut back everywhere else if you want. But, I mean, the disabled, so that they can have a quality of life. That's what our democracy is all about, isn't it? If we got the money, we can help. And there are priorities, and I think that should be one of the priorities of our society. The problem is we don't see the disabled people often, and they're kind of, we see them, but we don't know their travails. We don't know that when they go into a washroom or something like that, they have lower counters for them to wash their hands or something, but nobody's taking somebody in there with a wheelchair to see if they actually fit under the counter. That's a complaint that I have heard from people who have disabilities.
Yeah.
When I used to have to took my buddy to Hamilton Place one time, there was a washroom there that is for disabled, but it's way at the back, and it's across from the row of sinks, which makes it very difficult to turn into it. You know what I mean? If it was closer to the entrance door, you could go right in it, but they decided to put it way at the very end of all the stalls, and you can't, like, if I wasn't with him, he would never have been able to get in there.
Yeah.
And those are the things
that actually is something that bothers me. It's like there's also, you have to have a door that's wider, a 38-inch door, but because of the width of the wheelchair, etc.
well,
But
they
the
usually
trouble
take
is,
care of that part of it. It's the
yeah.
other parts that they don't
Yeah.
do well. They don't plan well. Like I said, this
Well, I was going to
level
say,
of the sink. They don't take somebody in there with, when they put the level of the sink, they don't take somebody in there with a wheelchair to see if they can do it. They just put it.
Yeah.
Somebody gives them the plans and they do it, and nobody says, "Can somebody actually use this?"
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. But anyway, you know, so there are ongoing, consistent problem. Okay, so not only do cutbacks not only do they have cutbacks in general, but the government also cuts back on the quality of the materials needed to make braces, etc. And you would have thought that actually what would need to be there in that regard would be that what you should be talking about is actually, though, you know, you do what is necessary to do the job. In any circumstances, you should have the materials that are necessary to do the job. It's the same for a knee brace. It's the same for a wheelchair. It's the same for a computer. If you're using, if you're working at City Hall, you know, give them the right equipment to do the job that they're working on.
Hashtag
I know
5to survive is the provincial network. Okay. It says here, we in Niagara did not want to go there. So we needed to move forward with hashtag 5to survive. That's what they're trying to do. That's what Fielding York is trying to do, to drum up support. So they have this hashtag 5to survive. So look that up, and that's their initiative. They're trying to do to fight the lack of support, basically, that they are getting right now. Like I said, their cost of living for a disabled person has got 60%, so she claims.
Okay, so the response from the Ontario government, MPP Sam Oosterhoff from Niagara West, is basically saying the Ontario government is working to invest nearly $3.4 billion in developmental services in the province, and there's an additional $300 million over 3 years for 230 non-profit development service providers across the province. $310 million for 230 organizations.
That's good news, but it really hasn't hit the ground yet, has it?
Well, I was going to say, do the math
St.
on
Catharines
that.
MP Jenny Stevens has been working with the Niagara agencies also to draw attention to the funding issue, a sustainable funding model, and that's one of the reasons that this whole article is sustainable funding model, so it doesn't get forgotten again and have to catch up. So something that sustains their funding and plans for funding increases along the way.
What you need to do in there is that every year there's an annualized percentage increase that is defined by the rate of inflation, etc., and that adjusts the payments according to the rate of inflation.
Yeah, the 5% thing. That's why hashtag 5to survive.
Yeah,
5%
is you know, I don't think 5% even really cuts it right now, because, as I said at the very top of this, we've got a situation whereby the amount of money given by ODSP for housing support isn't even a third of what you would need to be paying to pay for a rent right now.
Anyway,
and that could be even worse in Toronto, where maybe that's a fifth of what you need to pay for a rent, or even less.
Yeah, so let's keep an eye on that. This is anyway. There's a bunch of like Oosterhoff has said, you said, in addition to our government made former temporary wage enhancement programs permanent through creation of permanent compensation enhancement program for personal. Well, somebody's working on something. right? The program will continue to support those who deliver publicly funded personal and direct support services in the home, community care. That's another thing, trying to get enough people to take these jobs, to take care of people like PSWs and so on. They're paid paltry wages, and they do some pretty important work. They have to deal with people. They can't drop them. They got to make sure they're safe. They've got to make sure they're comfortable. They have to deal with bodily fluids basically too a lot of times. So I think there's probably, I don't know what we can do, but I think it's a very good idea that this was brought up, that there's no sustainable plan for the disabled, and our disabled people deserve that. They have to be able to be comfortable with the fact that they know they will not be left behind and then have to wait for somebody to pay attention to them again, by going to the press. It would make me much more comfortable if somebody didn't have to go to the press to make their issue, that it would be resolved, but that doesn't seem to be the way. Here's something that Karen Fraser has put here. Website.
She's talking about Ontario.ca page on improving accessibility built environmental standards. So look that up. It's on the comments. So obviously the link won't work in the video.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. And I think that we're probably just about done now, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. We are more or less for the day. So any final thoughts, Dave?
Oh, it's just the peace thing again. I hear that Netanyahu is going to come to Congress and speak to Congress. It's very, very clear that they are out of touch with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is looking at what's happening in Gaza and wants it to stop. And they're going to bring in Netanyahu and they're going to cheer him and clap for him. A guy who's done some monstrous things like this. They are slaves to AIPAC for some reason. Mike Johnson is the guy that's bringing him in.
Well, I in a way, I hope that Bernie Sanders gives them hell.
Bernie Sanders won't be there. He'll walk out, and I hope a whole pile of them do. I hope as soon as he starts talking, everybody that wants to stand up and walk out of there. The problem is, most of Congress, every Republican except Thomas Massey has an AIPAC guy that tells them what to do. And you can pretty well figure just about every Democrat's got an AIPAC guy too.
Probably,
and one thing, people have to get voted in, and they don't want AIPAC on their ass, besmirching them. Right now, they're saying Thomas Massey is analogous to Iran and Hezbollah. He's an anti-Semite because he doesn't want to spend any more money in Israel for their war.
What a ridiculous comment. Anyway, but anyway. All right. Well,
that's the danger. That's the danger for Congress. They're afraid of the Israeli lobby in a big way, and some of them just want alliance. No question alliance with Israel for some reason. A lot of it has to do with some of the Republicans being religious. In any case, there may be some peace in the horizon. Let's hope so, but I can't really see it happening anytime soon because there's supposed to be a peace deal and everybody's in denial of the peace deal. Except the Americans keep saying there's a peace deal. And Hamas says, well, Israel hasn't accepted it. And they say, yes, Israel has accepted it. Well, how come Israel is not saying so? They don't have to. It's their peace deal, so we're going to say it for them. Well, did Netanyahu say publicly anywhere that he accepts a peace deal? No. His government has collapsed now. Anyway, he's going to have to face an election soon. The war cabinet has collapsed.
Essentially, he's going to be, I suspect he's going to be out as soon as his election happens.
Well, yeah, but once Benny Gantz left, then he's stuck with and Benny Gantz was sort of even footed, but he's got Smotrich and Gant, Smotrich and who's the other guy, who are extreme right wingers. They want to colonize Gaza. So he's had to get rid of that war cabinet anyways, because those guys embarrass the crap out of Netanyahu.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It doesn't look good. The peace thing, it's seriously, they said, well, it's up to Hamas. You could stop this war tomorrow if you sign this deal. But the deal says they want Hamas to be discontinued. Well, what is Hamas really going to sign that deal? And then so they're trying to negotiate it, but nobody seems to be too interested in negotiations or getting anything done. And I like to say this whole thing could stop too. All this terrible stuff can stop in Gaza if Israel stopped dropping bombs. They're saying if Hamas gives up or accepts this deal, then there's peace. Well, if Israel stops dropping bombs, they could start the peace process, couldn't they?
Oh,
you
yeah.
don't need to
Absolutely.
drop bombs.
Yeah.
They don't need to kill that many civilians.
It's stop the dropping of the bombs.
Yes. Let's stop all fighting and see what we can do. And the ones that drop in most of the bombs are the Israelis. Anyway, without further ado, I bid you adieu. Pray for peace, everyone.